So the objectives for this module are to discuss the fundamentals of crew resource management, discuss the failures and introduce the error chain, discuss situational awareness, discuss how to regain situational awareness once lost, describe barriers to communications, discuss task saturation, and discuss assignments and coordination of duties. So why CRM? A well-trained crew works better than the sum of its single parts, while an untrained crew severely underperforms even the least capable crew member because of the chaos, communications problems, and lack of coordination of the group. CRM was developed by the airlines and later adopted by the U.S. Air Force. So by using CRM, airlines saw drops in incidents and better crew coordination, which led to better handling of emergencies. Our CRM has evolved into training of all persons involved to help thwart possible accidents. It is essential that everyone in the aircraft feel free to speak up and provide input and ideas, as anyone can come up with something that saves the plane and crew. The pilot is the final authority for the safe operation of the aircraft and will make the final decision. So let's see, what are some of the positive and negative behaviors and attitudes of crew members? So for positive, there's things like search for fulfillment, respect for others, high achievement, infectious excitement, job commitment, risk-taking, innovation, helpfulness, and ladder climbing. For negative, there's attitudes like just punching in the clock, cashing in the paycheck, jumping to conclusions, pessimism, stubbornness, too little too late, high intolerance, emotional instability. There's a whole plethora of things. So because of our use of CRM, Civil Air Patrol has almost consistently had a better safety record than general aviation. We are a very safety-focused organization, and we create very effective air teams. We follow regulations based on best practices. Now, if you look at this graph, it only goes up to 2010, but you can see that the number of incidents per 100,000 hours is way lower than the general aviation average. So surprisingly, we see lower numbers of mishaps in landing and takeoff than en route from the data from Capt missions and flights, which greatly differs from general aviation, in which a majority of accidents actually happen during takeoff and landing phases. These are the most dangerous parts of the flight envelope. For instance, Boeing had done a report showing that 49% of all fatal accidents happen during final descent and landing, and 14% happen during takeoff. So what are the failures that we can come across? So there's two major types. There's parts and equipment failures, and there's people failures. Parts and equipment failures include things like mechanical failures, environmental failures, things like parts on the aircraft, runway surfaces, lighting, radios, air traffic control. For people and human failures, people can fail to perform required actions. And in this instance, we're talking about failures of the pilot, the observer, the scanner, or even, it rarely happens, but failure of air traffic control. Which do you think is more common, parts and equipment failures or people failures? In the early 1900s, 80% of accidents were caused by mechanical failures. Nowadays, believe it or not, it's the opposite. 80% of accidents are caused by human error. Less than 20% of accidents are caused by mechanical failures. Airplanes have become more robust, more reliable, and now it just opens up things to failures because of people. Things like controlled flight into terrain is one of the large reasons for aircraft crashes, and that's definitely a human error. So let's look at the error chain. So a mishap or accidents typically don't happen because of just one thing going wrong. It's typically a chain of events, in which case all it takes is for one of the links to be broken to remove the threat of turning into a mishap or accident. For instance, if a pilot who is not trained for instrument meteorological conditions goes out on a perfectly sunny morning for a cross-country trip and doesn't check the weather on the route or neglects to get information at the destination airport, that in itself typically will not cause a mishap or accident. Now, if the weather changes and they didn't have an alternate, that creates another link in the chain. When getting to the destination airport and seeing that the weather is IMC, that's instrument meteorological conditions, that's another link. So maybe if the pilot had looked at the weather beforehand and saw a worrisome storm system coming in, they would have stopped the flight. Or maybe if alternate airports were selected, that could also avoid a mishap. Breaking any of these chains could stop an accident from happening. In many cases, an incident like this, and this example I'm using is actually from a AOPA accident report. The pilot continued to try to land in IMC conditions because he needed to get somewhere. And that's kind of one of the problems we'll talk about later with situational awareness. The get there-itis is the reason why he decided to try to land in IMC conditions and ended up landing before the runway. So it's up to each crew member to recognize these possible links and break the error chain. It's not just the pilot. So, we're trying to make sure everybody understands that if you have qualms about something or you think that something isn't kind of going right or whatever, speak up. So now it comes situational awareness. Now, situational awareness is knowing what is going on around you at all times. Everyone in the aircrew must exhibit situational awareness at all times. Each crew member needs to have their situational awareness at peak levels because it takes everyone's awareness to keep the plane safe. Scanners and observers have their own unique positions and functions that require attention. You need to always keep your situational awareness and ground it in reality. If you have a doubt about where you are, what you're doing, where you're going, that does not bode well and might require you to stop what you're doing and reconsider. So we got reality, your perception of reality, and as long as the two are close, you're good. When the two drift apart, your situational awareness is not so good, and you should really think about it. So know what is going on around you at all times, and this requires good mental health, good physical health, attentiveness, and inquisitiveness. So put simply, situational awareness means appreciating all you need to know about what is going on when the full scope of your task is taken into account. SA skills include professional skills developed through training, practice, and experience. Personal skills like good communication skills are a must to get your point across and receive valid input. Here's a great example. For a fighter pilot, situational awareness means knowing about the threats and intentions of enemy forces, as well as the status of their own aircraft. For an air traffic controller, it might be knowing about current aircraft positions and flight plans, and also predicting future states so as to detect possible conflicts. So loss of situational awareness. So any of these can cause a loss of situational awareness, from strength of an idea all the way to sudden loss of judgment. A pilot is cleared for an approach at night to an airport with which they are not familiar, but decides to fly by visual reference instead of following the vertical profile of the assigned instrument procedure because they can see the runway in the distance. This is a deviation from reality, and this is a loss of situational awareness. The pilot copies the clearance incorrectly but fails to read it back. The readback emission is overlooked by air traffic control, and the aircraft climbs to a level to which it has not been cleared. That's a loss of situational awareness. So here are some of the symptoms of loss of situational awareness. Everything from fixation, ambiguity, complacency, euphoria, confusion, distraction, and overload. Any of these symptoms requires you to step back and take a look at your situation. If it is too much to handle or it is outside of what is safe, you should seriously think about speaking up about aborting the mission. There are some hazardous attitudes that create problems for situational awareness as well. So these are anti-authority. So anti-authority is, don't tell me. There's impulsiveness, do something quickly. There's invulnerability, it would never happen to me. There's macho, I can do it. There's resignation, what's the use, I give up. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, there's get there-itis, which is I have to be there. These can all seriously affect your situational awareness and create very bad situations. So how do you regain situational awareness once you've gotten to a point where you're losing it? You can reduce your workload. You can suspend the mission. You can reduce your threats. You can get away from the ground and other obstacles, establish stable flight profiles until you can safely analyze the situation. Take your time, reduce your urgency, breathe, hydrate. So as aviators, we all have the saying, aviate, navigate, communicate. And that's the first thing we want to do is make sure that we're flying the airplane. And then we need to navigate the airplane. And then we need to communicate what we're doing. So how do we get it back? Trust your gut feelings and really think about stepping back and possibly, again, aborting the mission. There's a little information here about the sterile cockpit. Chatter in the cockpit can confuse or take attention away, so make sure to keep it quiet during important parts of flight. That's especially taxi, when the pilot is probably listening to the weather or to ground. Takeoff, obviously, because they're concentrating on taking out the airplane. Departure, that they're thinking about switching their radios to departure frequency and listening to what air traffic control is saying. Low level flying, because the pilot needs to take a really good look and keep himself out of the way of any obstacles. And approach and landing. It's, again, very important to be quiet during these important parts of flight where the pilots concentrate on what they're doing.
They talked about some ways to get back situational awareness, using the term like timeout or abort. stupid. And all those are valid. If you see something as a scanner and you don't like it and you don't feel comfortable, those are certainly good words. One that I found is really good, it handles a lot of things for you, is just saying, I don't feel comfortable doing this. And when you say that, that puts the onus on the pilot now to make you feel comfortable. And it's not an accusatory thing. It's not like, hey, dummy, why are you flying so low? Or what are you doing? Or this is crazy. That can kind of lead into a confrontational situation. But just by saying, I don't feel comfortable, that's a good way to knock things off and get things going again. The other thing I'll just reemphasize is there's a term limiting your talk to official business, critical phase of flight. And it's right on the slide, but I'll just reiterate sterile cockpit. That's what we call sterile cockpit. When you can still speak up, but only talk about the business at hand, as opposed to flying to and from the search area. If you want to talk about how you're training your dog to fetch the paper, there's nothing wrong with that.
During the pre-flight briefing, the passenger briefing and pre-taxi briefing, those parameters that Colonel Denisick just mentioned are part of his normal pre-flight briefing, and he'll describe to you that you're talking and I've got to concentrate. I'll put my hand up, which means silence immediately. So that's taken into resource management, and that's part of it. And if you feel hinky about something or weird, that's the I don't feel comfortable or I feel hinky about it. Speak up. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's important to do.
Okay, so barriers of communication. So this is a great one. Looks like someone's not getting rescued today. So we're going to discuss some barriers of communication. There's a difference between hearing and listening. Just make sure that when communications is happening, that you're actually listening and not just hearing what people are saying. You need to be able to take the information and really digest it. Distractors. There are distractors that are barriers to communication. So noise, static, simultaneous transmissions, fatigue and stress, incomplete or ambiguous messages, too complex, or using unfamiliar terminology. I know pilots typically tend to use lots and lots of terminology that might be unfamiliar with those that are not pilots. So keeping it simple is really good. Personal distractors, it's boring, lack of rapport, lack of credibility. It can get boring up there looking for hours for a target, but just make sure that you keep yourself focused and the air crew keeps communicating. Task saturation. Too much information at one time and too many tasks to accomplish in a given time usually occurs when an individual is confronted with a new or unexpected situation and loses situational awareness.
You can juggle 3 balls and maybe 4, 5, 6, but at some point you're going to get to 7 or 8 and you throw one more ball in there and the whole thing comes apart. So that's the chain of events, and that's what saturation is. And everybody gets saturated at some point with too much information, too many tasks, and so forth. So as an observer or a scanner, when you're trying to keep your log, you're trying to keep your scanning, you're trying to communicate with the pilot and all these other things, at some point there's just too much. And you need to be able to say, in good faith, I'm task loaded here. Just back off a little bit. We need to reassess this. So
yes.
It happens to everybody at every phase, and I'm sure Colonel Denisick would support that with mission stuff he's done in the Air Force as well as flying for Southwest. And that's why airliners have crews more than one person. One's flying and the other one's monitoring all the systems. One person trying to do all of that is just too much to do effectively.
Plus, in addition, with task saturation, so you're up in the airplane, there's going to be a lot of new things. It's going to be a different situation. You might be confronted with an emergency. You might be sick from turbulence. There's all these things that can lead you to task saturation. So what happens is that, preoccupation with a different situation may lead to tunnel vision, where you can actually lose track of everything else around you and just focus too much on one single thing. And that also could create task saturation. Once the tunnel vision gets too bad, you could go so far as complete situational awareness being lost. And it's almost like daydreaming. You're just up there and not understanding what's going on. And that's very important to keep an eye on. If you've got too much going on and it's overwhelming you for you to notify the rest of the crew members. Everyone needs some workload to stay mentally alert and active. The amount of work that any member can handle is directly related to experience level. Each crew member must try to keep his or her workload at an acceptable level. And again, if you feel overwhelmed, speak up and let your crew know, because once you get oversaturated, you basically become ineffective.
I'll give you an example. The kind of the classic example of task saturation is guys flying larger aircraft that have retractable landing gear. They come in for a landing. Once they put the flaps down, you get a landing gear warning horn, a loud horn that goes off, beep, beep, beep in the headset. And that horn keeps going off all the way till they touch down on the runway with the landing gear up. And that's because of tunnel vision due to task saturation. And you interview them afterwards, and they would swear they never heard that horn, even though when you listen to the cockpit voice recorder, it's out there blaring away. It happens to everybody.
Yeah, so that's a really good point too. So other members of the crew should also keep an eye on the pilot as well, because it's very easy for a pilot to get overtasked. You've got all the communications going on. You're concentrating on flying. All of a sudden, there's an emergency going on, or someone is yelling in your ear from air traffic control or whatever. It's good for air crews also to kind of keep an eye on the pilot to kind of see if the pilot needs help, maybe taking some of these tasks off of his hands. So again, keep your workload to an acceptable level. You feel overwhelmed, tell the others before becoming saturated and losing your situational awareness. And as I mentioned, watch your team members for sign of saturation. So now we're going to talk about identification of resources. So there's both external resources and internal resources. So external resources can be people, equipment, or simply information. Internal resources are primarily training and experience. Resources are needed for the successful accomplishment of the mission. Each crew member must be able to identify the resources available to him or her, determine where the resources can be located when needed, and effectively incorporate those resources into the mission. So as you see, we have a mission commander and we have an aircraft commander. So all flight-related duties are conducted under the supervision of the aircraft commander. Mission-related duties may also be conducted under the supervision of the aircraft commander, but a properly trained observer can also fill the role of mission commander. The key is that positive delegation of monitoring duties is as important as a positive delegation of flying duties. As previously discussed, it is very important for each crew member to know what they're supposed to be doing at all times and under all conditions. Aircraft safety duties vary with the startup, taxi, takeoff, different aspects of flight. Mission duties are related to the mission objective, primarily to fly the aircraft safely and precisely, which is the pilot, and to scan effectively, which are the scanners and the observers. Crew coordination. So the same general principles of crew coordination and resource management apply to all the members of the aircrew team. Incident commanders, planners, operations sectional chiefs, all these, mission observers, scanners, air traffic controllers, flight service station personnel should all be considered sources for appropriate information by the aircrew team. In order for any information to be used, it must be effectively communicated. The effective communication process that leads to good crew coordination actually starts well before the flight begins. Each member must pay close attention during the incident commander briefing to every detail presented. Clear understanding of the big picture, search objectives, altitudes, area assignments, and search patterns to be used prior to departure will preclude questions and a debate in flight when other tasks should take higher priority. Crew members having questions are encouraged to ask them at this time. The incident commander or air operations officer will normally establish certain safety-related rules for conducting that particular mission. So basically with crew coordination, understand and execute your assignments, communicate, and question them. Okay, so here's a CRM checklist outlining all the aspects of CRM, the positive factors for success and the negative factors that can lead to failure. So we've got the mission planning brief, the positive factors, organize, clearly assess, etc. Negative factors, neglecting, rushing things, an incomplete planning brief, just not giving the right information or not giving enough information. With situational awareness, positive factors are anticipating, monitoring, preventing loss, etc. Negative factors are disorientation, confusion, loss, fixated, just losing the situational awareness. So I'll just let you all read through all these different CRM skills, their positive factors and their negative factors. So in summary, Pay close attention to all briefings. Understand the big picture. Task overload is a very real thing that you really need to look out for not just yourself, but also your other crew members. And as I mentioned before, a majority of the accidents happen during taxi takeoff and departure, and then in approach and landing. So keep a sterile cockpit, keep conversation distractions to a minimum during these phases of the flight, because the pilot really needs to concentrate on these. Begin critical communications with instructions and then explain. The successful mission hinges on each and every crew member. Each and every crew member has their own roles, but it's also important for each and every crew member to watch out for situational awareness or loss of situational awareness or disorientation or anything in any of their other crew members. You should learn how to use the procedures and tools available to you and use them correctly. Never stop learning. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to say that I'm not comfortable with this. Don't criticize, and remember that the mission pilot must make the final decision based on the crew's input because he's in charge of the airplane.
Congratulations! This marks the end of the Hawaii Wing 2020 Scanner Training video series. If you haven't already, please go to eServices and complete the Aircrew Professionalism course. Then, take the Mission Scanner exam and the course critique available on the Hawaii Wing Emergency Services Scanner Training webpage. For those of you viewing this series on YouTube, the Hawaii Wing Emergency Services website URL is available in the video description below. To complete your scanner training, ensure that you have completed ICS 100, ICS 700, and the Aircraft Ground Handling course. Then, coordinate with your Emergency Services Training Officer to schedule your check flights.